Karen stood up in the middle of the HOA meeting, her voice shaking with fury, and screamed that my pregnant wife deserved to die. The neighbors, our so-called community, clapped and nodded as if they were watching some twisted reality show. None of them knew the truth that the man sitting quietly in the back corner pretending to be just another homeowner was actually a federal judge. And that night I decided I was done hiding. We moved to Willow Ridge about 6 months ago, hoping for peace. My wife Sarah was 3 months pregnant, then glowing with that calm happiness only expectant mothers have. I'd told everyone I was an accountant taking a remote job. It wasn't a lie exactly, I did numbers, but the truth was I was on leave from the federal bench after a mafia case had put a target on my back. We came here to disappear. We wanted quiet nights, morning walks, and a safe place to raise our child. But quiet never lasts long in neighborhoods run by people like Karen Whitmore. Karen was the kind of HOA president who believed she owned every square foot of the community. She patrolled the streets with her clipboard like a sheriff in heels, taking photos of violations, trash bins left out too long, a fence that was one shade darker than HOA-approved beige. She smiled that tight, smug smile when she fined old Mr. Collins for his bird feeder. I laughed it off at first. Sarah told me to let it go. But deep down I knew women like Karen didn't stop. They escalated. It started with tragedy. Karen's brother Robert was in a bad car accident one night and brought into the hospital where Sarah worked. She was the night nurse in charge of trauma. They fought to save him for hours. I remember Sarah coming home just before sunrise, eyes red still in her scrubs. "We lost him," she whispered. She looked heartbroken, like she'd failed him personally. But she hadn't. He was gone before he ever reached that hospital. The next day, Karen stormed in during shift change, screaming that Sarah had killed her brother. "You gave him the wrong medicine," she shouted. "You let him die." The other nurses tried to calm her, but rumors spread faster than truth in a small town. Within a week, everyone in Willow Ridge knew the killer nurse lived on Maple Court. The HOA started whispering about whether Sarah violated community standards by bringing scandal to the neighborhood. Karen made sure every neighbor got a copy of the incident report. People started crossing the street instead of waving. Then came the eggs on our porch, the red spray paint across our garage door. "Killer," in dripping letters. Karen stood at the end of the driveway one morning, arms folded, pretending to check her phone as the police cars arrived. The local police chief, Tom Bradley, was her old high school buddy. He knocked on our door like he'd been waiting years to do it. "We're taking Sarah in for questioning," he said, avoiding my eyes. She was still in her pajamas, barefoot, clutching her belly. I tried to speak, told them she was innocent, but they handcuffed her right there on our front lawn in front of the neighbors. That image, Sarah trembling, the sun just coming up, cuffs digging into her wrists, will haunt me forever. She looked at me and whispered, "David, I didn't do anything wrong." And I said the only thing I could, "I know. I'll get you out of this." But deep down I wasn't sure I could. The days that followed were hell. Every news outlet ran the same headline: "Local nurse faces murder charges." The paper was owned by Karen's cousin. The police leaked false details. The district attorney, Michael Ross, gave press conferences calling Sarah a cold-blooded killer. He announced they'd seek the death penalty. It was political theater. He was running for state attorney general and needed a win. My wife was just the perfect sacrifice. At first I thought the system would work. I thought the truth would speak for itself. But her public defender was a nervous kid who'd never handled a capital case. He fumbled through hearings, missed deadlines, didn't even object when evidence went missing. When I tried to hire a real lawyer, every firm suddenly became too busy. Karen's influence reached farther than I imagined. I started to break. Nights were the worst. I'd sit in the dark listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life bringing her here, hiding who I really was. Maybe if I'd just told everyone the truth that I was Judge David Harrison, none of this would have happened. But the threats from my old case were still real. I told myself I was protecting her. Now she was locked in a cell because of me. One night she called from the jail. Her voice was weak. "David, what if they kill me before I can meet our baby?" I remember staring at the wall, unable to breathe. That was the moment I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I was done waiting for justice to show up. I was going to bring it myself. So I started digging. quietly. I still had contacts, old colleagues, investigators who owed me favors. I learned that Karen had withdrawn $50,000 from her brother's life insurance account right before Sarah's arrest. 2 days later, that exact amount appeared in Chief Bradley's personal bank records. The medical examiner, Dr. Frank Stevens, had received a consulting fee of $25,000. The DA's campaign donations spiked from anonymous donors tied to the same insurance payout. And the judge overseeing the case, Patricia Coleman, had dinner with Ross at the Cedar Grill every Thursday. Same corner booth, same bottle of wine. I documented everything, photos, recordings, bank transfers. I kept it all hidden in a folder labeled tax receipts. I was no longer just Sarah's husband. I was building a federal case. But every day I waited, she suffered. Her pregnancy was getting risky. The jail doctor warned she could lose the baby. I filed requests for medical release, denied. Coleman smiled through every hearing like she was enjoying the show. "Your wife will be treated like any other murderer," she said, her tone icy. That night I sat in the parking lot behind the courthouse, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I whispered to myself, enough. The trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was packed, neighbors, reporters, curious locals who'd already decided she was guilty. Karen sat in the front row wearing black, a button on her jacket with her brother's photo. Justice for Robert. When they brought Sarah in, she was 7 months pregnant, pale as paper, barely able to stand. Still, she looked at me and tried to smile. I nodded, pretending I was calm. Inside, I was shaking. The prosecution painted her as a monster in scrubs. Dr. Stevens testified that she'd injected a fatal dose of medication. Chief Bradley swore she'd confessed privately. Lies, all of it. Sarah's lawyer mumbled something about an honest mistake. I wanted to scream. It was like watching a rigged game, knowing the outcome before the first move. By Thursday, the jury looked ready to convict. I'd planned to reveal my evidence later to build an airtight case, but time was gone. Then Friday came and fate handed me the perfect opening. Before closing arguments, the judge allowed victim statements. Karen stood up, trembling with rage, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "That woman killed my brother in cold blood," she shouted. "She's sitting there pretending to be innocent, rubbing her belly like she deserves sympathy. She should be executed. That baby doesn't deserve to be born." Sarah broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Judge Coleman didn't say a word. She was smiling. That was it. I felt something snap inside me. I stood up in the back row and said, "Your Honor, I need to speak." Coleman banged her gavel. "Sit down, sir. Spectators are not permitted." "I'm not a spectator." My voice was steady, louder than I expected. "My name is David Harrison, Federal District Judge, Western Division. And I have evidence of massive corruption in this courtroom." The silence that followed was electric. Cameras turned toward me. Karen's mouth fell open. Coleman froze. "This is outrageous," she stammered. "You have no authority here." "Actually, I do," I said, walking toward the front. "When civil rights are violated and justice is corrupted, I not only have authority, I have a duty." I placed my folder on the prosecutor's table right beside Ross. He flinched. I opened it slowly, letting the weight of the moment build. "Here," I said, holding up the first page, "is a bank transfer, $50,000 from Karen Whitmore to Chief Bradley 2 days after my wife's arrest." Gasps filled the room. I flipped to the next document. "Here's a recorded call with Dr. Stevens discussing his payment for falsifying the autopsy." I pressed play on a small recorder. Stevens' voice echoed, "I'll say whatever they need as long as the money clears first." The courtroom erupted. Even the jurors looked sick. I wasn't done. "Here are photographs of District Attorney Ross meeting Judge Coleman at Cedar Grill every week, planning this conviction before the trial began." I spread the photos across the table. Coleman turned pale. And finally I said, handing the clerk a sealed envelope, 3 independent medical reports proving Robert Whitmore's death was unavoidable. My wife followed every proper procedure. She tried to save him. The room exploded in whispers, gasps, and camera flashes. Coleman shouted for order, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Karen stood pointing at me, screaming, "You're lying. You're just trying to save her." I turned to her, calm now. "No, Karen. You tried to buy justice. You paid to destroy an innocent woman and her unborn child. And now everyone knows." The jury foreman rose, visibly trembling. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, we can't continue. The defendant is innocent. Coleman didn't move. She just stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. I walked over, looked her dead in the eyes, and said, "This ends today." Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Agents from the federal office were already in the hallway. Within hours, the arrests began. Chief Bradley, Dr. Stevens, Ross, and Coleman all taken away in handcuffs. And Karen Whitmore, the woman who demanded death for my pregnant wife, was charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit murder. As they led her past me, she glared one last time. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I didn't answer. I just watched as she disappeared down the corridor, surrounded by the same officers she once commanded. When the judge finally struck the gavel, dismissing all charges against Sarah, she collapsed into her chair, shaking. I rushed to her, held her as tightly as I could. "It's over," I whispered. She looked up at me through tears. "You were never just an accountant, were you?" I smiled faintly. "No, but you were always innocent." Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had once chanted for her death was silent. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Some people cried. Others turned away ashamed. The sign that once hung outside our HOA clubhouse. Integrity, community, justice. Suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I didn't stay to watch the chaos. I walked Sarah to the car, helped her in, and drove away. The world felt quieter. Not peaceful, just emptied out. I knew there'd be trials, sentencing, fallout. But none of that mattered right then. I'd done what I had to do. I'd stopped them. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the system. It comes from the people brave enough to stand up when the system rots from within.